Let's go get him. Let's go get him today, man. Let's go. Hey, dominate on 3. 1, 2, 3. Dominate.
What's good, everyone? I'm back here today with another stream. You know, we got to be talking 49ers and we got to be talking NFL really after the news that hit today. And I'm here with draft guru Eric Price, aka Bay Area Baller. If you guys don't know him, I'll drop his stuff in the description. What's up, man?
Rohan, what's going on? Last night when we were talking on Twitter, I don't think we expected the NFL to bless us with this content and these transactions that went on today. So I'm fired up to talk some ball with you.
You're totally right. I mean, like Rodgers news for me, I did expect him to get re-signed, so we can hop right into it. But I did expect him to get re-signed, but that was a magnitude of a contract, and it happened. It like you don't know when it's happening until it actually happens. And then to follow it up just 2 hours later with the Russell Wilson news, where I personally thought he'd stay in Seattle, and for the price that he got acquired for, what are your initial thoughts? I guess.
Yeah, well, let me start off with A-Rod, and A-Rod's my guy. A-Rod's my boy. All right, I'm a Niner fan, but I'm big on Aaron Rodgers. And when the Packers drafted Jordan Love, I was pissed off for Aaron Rodgers. And just because I'm looking at it, he's a Hall of Fame quarterback, still playing at an MVP level. He's under contract for multiple years, and you're going to go out and spend a first-round pick on a quarterback? Like, I completely understand why Aaron Rodgers was so frustrated. I mean, in my opinion, that's a fireable offense for that GM Gutekunst. I don't know how he still has a job, because that just seemed ludicrous at that time when they took Jordan Love, when the Packers needed more weapons, right? We know they got Devontae, but then after that, there's a big drop-off when we're talking receiving weapons in Green Bay. So I understood why Aaron Rodgers was so upset with them. And I thought he might be on the move. I thought he could end up in Denver, which obviously that's not how it turned out. But, hey, Aaron Rodgers still in a Packers uniform, and Rohan, hey, the 49ers own A-Rod in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, stats speak for itself. We beat them this year. We beat them in 2019. We've consistently beat Aaron Rodgers in recent history. And I mean, Aaron Rodgers, right? I think, yeah, if you make a argument for who's the best quarterback in the league, he's got to be in that conversation. Signs that huge 4-year, $200 deal, or $200 million, although we don't know necessarily the specifics, because Rodgers himself said that the report might be inaccurate. We do know that he's going to be there, and it looks like now after the Packers franchise tag Devontae Adams, they're not going to keep their star duo in Green Bay for a while, although it is coming at the expense of other players because they're cutting Za'Darius Smith. They might be extending and restructuring other players. So it is interesting to see how the Green Bay Packers kind of rebound after this move. But looking at it from a 49ers perspective, I thought the move definitely improved, or not necessarily improved, but it didn't diminish necessarily Jimmy Garoppolo's value, because guess what? It takes him out of the hands of another contender. And me personally, like, I've been following one of the better insiders for the Denver Broncos in Benjamin Allwright, and he was kind of alluding to how the Broncos weren't really on Rodgers' radar over the last week. He said they kind of have moved on and were moving on towards a guy like Russell Wilson, who was their 1B all along. And so, yeah, that kind of gave me some news, along with Brian Gutekunst and Murphy's words, that they hadn't really received offers and they weren't really going to move him regardless. So it kind of all lined up, and it seems like, yeah, the Broncos got who they want after Rodgers was gone, and Rodgers moves. And since I didn't consider really the Broncos to be a prime destination for Jimmy Garoppolo, I thought they'd either go big or they'd go home by either signing a bridge quarterback like a Mitch Trubisky, or like maybe even potentially Teddy Bridgewater back and then drafting Malik Willis at 9 or drafting whoever they thought was the best quarterback at 9 and moving forward with their young core and their future, because that also could be a potential thing. And not only that, it also could be a good trade candidate for a guy like Deshaun Watson down the road if his legal case clears up. But what are your thoughts on that and Jimmy Garoppolo related?
Yeah, as far as Jimmy's trade value, it definitely helps because if Rodgers did move to a different team, I would take a team out of the contention for the Jimmy Garoppolo sweepstakes. And but Rohan, my hot take has been that I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo has trade value, and I say that kind of to be contrarian because it feels like everyone thinks we were going to get a second or third round pick for Jimmy, and I was just pushing back on it from a GM's perspective. If I'm an NFL GM, I wouldn't want to trade a second round pick for Jimmy G. Then you feel obligated to sign him to an extension, and I just wouldn't want to risk my career on that. That being said, Jimmy Garoppolo is a starting quarterback in the NFL. He should be. He's a top, anywhere from 15 to 20, somewhere in that range. But I think he's overpaid, Rohan. And that's where, if I'm a GM, I would rather wait, play the waiting game, see if the Niners end up having to cut Jimmy. Now I don't have to spend the capital on the trade, and I can sign him for less than, the 27 mil that he's due next year.
You're totally right. That could be the path that some teams choose to go. But when I look at it, I look at the amount of teams that are currently in dire need of a quarterback, a starting level quarterback. And also in the NFL currently, there are a good amount of quarterbacks who are getting paid way more than they're supposed to. You see Sam Darnold, who's going to be on that 5th-year option, which is way more expensive than he's probably going to get. Baker Mayfield is also going to be on that option. And so you have these kind of back level quarterbacks who you consider may have more potential, but really haven't shown enough in their NFL level to be warranted to be costing that much money. And I think Jimmy Garoppolo does fall in the range of overpaid quarterbacks. But the reality is in the NFL currently, with the market value rising so high for quarterbacks, it's going to be a little more sustainable and a little more not reasonable, but justifiable for these quarterbacks to being paid this much. Like when I thought after 2017, when Jimmy Garoppolo got that 5-year, $137 million contract, I was like, wow, really? We're paying a guy after
highest
5
paid
games,
quarterback,
the highest paid player in NFL history after just 5 games, in which he was fairly mediocre as well. It's not like we were winning solely because of Garoppolo. I understand the energy that he put into this franchise because we were obviously in losing, with a lot of losing seasons, coming off a 2-14 season, hadn't really drafted well, and off 2 poor coaches. So I can understand the reason why, because we won 5 in a row. We were going from 1-10 to 6-10 to end that year, and so I could definitely understand the energy behind it, but to pay that much at that time, yeah, it's a little shocking. But now when you look at it, there are a lot of quarterbacks making this 27.5. Another guy is Carson Wentz, who's making around $28 million. And, he might be considered overpaid, and the Colts look like they want to move on from him as well. So I don't think it's just Garoppolo that falls in this range. And I do think that when you look at it, there are a lot of teams where they have strong rosters outside the quarterback position. Just to name a few, we've got the Washington Commanders, who have a strong set of options with Terry McLaurin. They've got young guys like De'Ami Brown, and they've got Cam Sims, alongside a good running back in Antonio Gibson and a productive third down back in J.D. McKissic. So they've got a strong offensive group with a young offensive line as well. And then on the defensive side, their front four, they were so good that they could even let go Ryan Kerrigan. And they also have, a somewhat fairly solid corners, although they do have to improve based on what they're being paid. But they have a strong team where they could justify getting a guy like Garoppolo, and that could elevate their ceiling just because they've been lacking at quarterback for a while. Taylor Heinicke is not better than Jimmy Garoppolo. Just looking at the numbers, Taylor Heinicke was not an accurate quarterback last season. And also he tried to overextend a lot of plays using the intangibles, or using the traits that he works best at, which is his athleticism rather than his arm talent. And so you've got a team like the Commanders, you've got a team like the Carolina Panthers, who I think fall in that range. You also got a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, although I think they're more of a dark horse compared to the Commanders in this race. And not only that, you've got a guy like a team like the Indianapolis Colts, who Chris Ballard said we're looking for a leader at the quarterback position. And while Garoppolo might not necessarily be a significant upgrade to Carson Wentz, I don't think he is. I do think that he is a leader, which Carson Wentz, like hearing based on what reports are saying, Carson Wentz really wasn't. And also, you've got a guy in DeForest Buckner who's there in Indianapolis, and DeForest Buckner, he might argue for Jimmy Garoppolo, just seeing that leadership firsthand. So those are the couple of teams that kind of go into my mind just because they're strong teams outside of the quarterback position. Garoppolo could just elevate their ceiling enough to where they're in playoff contention again.
And I love what you said right there. The Commanders, Ron Rivera, I mean, his seat's got to be warming up. And I feel like he went out and said somewhere he's looking for a veteran quarterback. They want a vet to come in and take over that quarterback position. And the Colts, you mentioned the Colts. I mean, hey, Jimmy Garoppolo, he's got a hell of a handoff, okay? And if he ended up in Indy, he'd be handing the ball off to a hell of a running back in Jonathan Taylor. So those are two teams that I wouldn't be shocked. And if Jimmy does get traded, I'm not going to be shocked. But no, I think you hit the nail on the head there with the Commanders and the Colts kind of being the two teams to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I agree. And it's definitely going to be interesting in terms of the value, because I do think when we look at the Russell Wilson trade, right? Wilson was traded for 2 1s, 2 2s, a fifth, and also 3 very valuable players. I mean, not necessarily Drew Lock, but you got Shelby Harris, a talented defensive end, and you've also got Noah Fant, a guy who's a young tight end who probably is going to do better than he did in Denver. I mean, he's got Drew Lock, so maybe not. But, you got a young tight end, and then you also got Drew Lock, who I'm not necessarily that high on anymore. But, you got some pieces there. Looking at the 2 deals, the 2 blockbuster quarterback deals over the last 2 offseasons. Last offseason, we had Matthew Stafford. Stafford was traded for 2 1s, and he was also the Los Angeles was also able to ship out Jared Goff's contract. And I think that just comparing the 2 deals, Stafford objectively had a better season than Russell Wilson this season, just in my opinion. I do think, though, that Wilson obviously got the more value compared to Stafford. And I understand Stafford was older. I do understand that. But looking at it, the market value for quarterbacks is increasing. And I think with the amount that Russell Wilson got, a team that, like the Commanders, who were about to trade 3 first-round picks plus more capital for Russell Wilson, could definitely justify just trading 1/3 of that value for Jimmy Garoppolo.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not going to argue with you there. I still think a first-round pick would be steep.
Yeah,
I don't expect a first-round pick for Jimmy, but
especially at pick 12.
Yeah, and they're being aggressive. Hey, the Commanders have shown they want to get in a vet quarterback, and they were aggressive trying to get Russell Wilson. Obviously, they failed. Not their wrongdoing. I mean, the Seahawks. How do you feel that? Would you agree with the Seahawks taking a lesser of a deal to send him out of the conference? How do you feel about that, Rohan?
I mean, I can understand it. It's just because you obviously are going to be competing with this team in the future, right? And a guy like Russell Wilson probably is going to remain at a fairly consistent level over the next 2, 3, 4 years, barring any significant injury. And so the one thing is, you just made the AFC a lot more stacked, and you also decreased some of the competition in the NFC for when the Seahawks, I'd assume, probably develop their next quarterback or potentially get a guy like Deshaun Watson. 49ers fans don't hate me for that, but potentially get a guy like Deshaun Watson with the value they just recouped. And guess what? Now you deal with one less quarterback in the division or in the conference, and you might have upgraded at quarterback, or you might be developing a new guy down the line, which may help you. And that's kind of where I'm thinking about it, because if you have that guy in the division, it would suck if that's the one guy keeping you out of the playoffs every year for a wild card spot, that type of thing. So I can understand trading him outside of the division, not division, trading him outside of the conference, especially because you do have the potential to play those guys more. And it obviously, a guy like Russell Wilson is obviously going to improve the chances of any team that he goes to.
Yeah, from where I'm sitting, I feel like I'm not going to trade Russell within my division, but if I got a better offer on the table and the team's in my conference, I just feel like I would take the extra first round pick. But no, I understand why they traded him out of conference.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, if you trade him in conference, like I don't think the 49ers have a similar limitation just because it's Jimmy Garoppolo, not Russell Wilson, where I don't think they're necessarily afraid of Jimmy Garoppolo playing against them.
They
And I
shouldn't
actually
be.
do think,
I'm not.
yeah, and I actually do think they'd probably entertain the idea of having Jimmy Garoppolo play against them in 2022, not necessarily because they believe they win, but because they probably want the reunion back in Jimmy Garoppolo, give him a nice farewell, because both sides are now cooperating and both sides are working together to make this trade. So a team like the Commanders, a team like the Saints, I don't think the Bucks will trade for him, but a team like the Bucks, those are all teams that play the 49ers in 2022, could make for a good storyline and a good reunion type of thing.
I feel you.
Yeah. But, all this talk aside, let's get to what we're really here for and what you really are good at, the NFL draft. I know you came out with a top 20 wide receivers list, and I want to break it down. So tell me your quick thoughts on the receivers and who you have, essentially who are the sleeper picks and who you are lower on than other people, necessarily the national media or whoever.
Definitely. And I mean, the first thing at the combine that just popped off the screen was this draft class speed. I mean, the speed was just tantalizing going through this combine. Record number of wide receivers running in the 4.3s. And, right off the bat, guys that I'm higher on than most. Let's start off at, we're talking about my top 20. Number 20 is Danny Gray. And I don't know anyone else that has Danny Gray inside the top 20. And when I was watching
here,
Danny,
I got him, but go ahead.
That's right, Rohan. Rohan, you're high on Danny Gray too. Now, thanks for reminding me about that tweet. You told he ran the 4.33, and then Rohan said, "Hey, baller. It could have been even faster if he didn't pull whatever muscle." Because I saw the video, and he did come up. So you wonder that 4.33, is that a 4.29? Is it a 4.31? Hey, either way, we're splitting hairs. But Danny Gray's speed just pops off on the tape. And he's got more than speed, because I thought he was a nifty route runner. And the way he would throttle down in zone is when you're going up against a zone defense, you can't be running full speed the whole time. You got to find the hole and kind of throttle down, settle down into the hole, and make yourself available for the quarterback. And Danny Gray was doing an excellent job of that. A player that I'm lower on than most, Rohan, Justin Ross out of Clemson. He's big. He's 6'4". He's a good route runner, but I just didn't see the explosiveness that I'm looking for. Like he's a poor man's T. Higgins, where I know some people got him inside their top 10. I got him down at 18. How do you feel about Justin Ross?
Now, I'm a little biased towards Justin Ross because I did watch Clemson for a good amount of time. Like last year, not necessarily as much, but the years before, I was a Clemson fan since probably 2015, 2016, somewhere around there. So I've been watching Justin Ross right throughout the first part of his career, obviously before his injury. And I thought that Justin Ross was a fairly solid receiver, but you do have guys like T. Higgins and guys around you. And when I look at Justin Ross specifically, it's not that Justin Ross doesn't pop off to me. It's just that there are a lot of receivers in this class that do pop off to me like that. And that's why I think Justin Ross may be especially with other concerns, he may be slid a little lower in this draft class compared to other receivers, because you do have those blazers right in this class. And the thing that compares Ross to other players is the route running. But I think in this class, you also have very solid route runners in addition to those burners, which is why I think some teams might elect to go with other players just because they fit a little more of an all-around receiver rather than a one-sided receiver, just getting the more better value. But do I think Justin Ross has the ability to succeed? Yeah, I do.
No doubt. And I got him at 18. I got him inside the top 20. So, as a prospect, I would draft him, if I'm a GM, but it wouldn't be, I'm thinking maybe until like the fourth round, end of the third, fourth. That's where I'm looking. And I know I'm lower on Ross than most scouts. But moving through the list at 15, Wan'Dale Robinson. And I've heard around like some Debo. I've heard some Debo being referenced with Wan'Dale Robinson, but I don't see the comp there. I think where that's coming from is Wan'Dale also has gotten carries out of the backfield,
Yeah.
It's not so much his senior year, but sophomore, junior year, Kentucky was really using him as a running back and a receiver. So I think that's where the Debo stuff comes from. But I like Wandale. He's a guy that will make you miss. All right. Wandale, he's very shifty. He's short. He's going to be a slot receiver, but I like what he can do at the next level. He caught 100 balls for Kentucky this past season, so he was ultra productive on the field. And I got him at 15. What do you think about Rohan? Do you think I got him too high, too low?
So quickly before we get to Wandale, I just wanted to give a couple of thoughts as well on Danny Gray because, like you
Please.
said, I think Gray, right? The Gray isn't just a speedster in this class. I think Gray has a pretty solid profile because when you look at it, he's not like a lot of other speedsters in that he's not a small build frame. He's 6', 186, pretty solid for a wide receiver of his size and explosiveness. And it's not like he can only run vertical routes. I think he's got the ability to run a pretty solid route tree in the NFL if coached up properly to run those routes. And that's because I think his explosiveness allows you to just beat him off the line and run those short slants. Also, it allows you to run those digs and all these different simple routes where you don't necessarily just rely on speed, but you also rely on just getting off after that first bounce. And I think that that's something that Danny Gray definitely has. And I'm not necessarily worried as much about his strength. I think his 186-pound profile is good enough to match with his speed in that systems like the 49ers could definitely use him. And he works very well he works very well kind of when he's in space. And I think that that's something the 49ers excel at with their receivers. You saw it with Jimmy Garoppolo. The reason that his numbers were so inflated is because receivers were getting 6.2 yards after the catch per completion. It's not like receivers were just not in space. It's because Kyle Shanahan has found a way, even in a limited system with Garoppolo where you're throwing only over the middle, he's found a way to get these receivers open. And with a guy like Danny Gray, I think that type of value is certainly there because he has the ability to make plays once he's caught the ball. And I think that that's very valuable in a Kyle Shanahan type of offense, just 49ers speaking, but it also could be valuable in a couple other schemes. But looking at Wandale Robinson, but one thing that I wouldn't say necessarily shocked me as much because I wasn't too far into it, but I was reading that scouts thought he'd measure in at 5'11" and a little bit of a bigger frame, and he comes in at 5'8", like 178, I believe. And the thing about that
That's
is,
small.
yeah, at 5'11", and like maybe a 200-pound frame, sure, you could potentially compare him to Deebo Samuel because he could potentially have that strength. But I think at 5'8", 178, I don't believe the Deebo comparison. I don't think it's a very valid one, and I don't think it's fair to Wandale Robinson because just because he got carries doesn't mean anything really because he's not nearly as physical as Deebo Samuel is at that smaller frame. And at
He's more of a
Kentucky,
scat back. If you want to give Wandale reps at running back, it'd be more of like a third down role as in that scat back.
Exactly. He probably has the ability to, go out from the backfield and make plays from like in the receiving game out of the backfield. I don't disagree there. But Wandale Robinson, I mean, the smaller frame does kind of concern me. He did run 4.44, so he ran pretty good at the combine. It's not like that's a problem. But I do think the smaller frame limits him right to the slot rather than like he's probably going to be a slot receiver. He could be used somewhat in a gadget type of role because he's got the speed, and I think he definitely has the acceleration after the catch. But Wandale Robinson's height does limit him a bit, and I don't mind your ranking at 15.
Okay. I like to hear that. Now, you want me to move through this list?
Go for it.
All right. Well, next up, it's a guy that I think anybody who's watched college football knows, and it's John Mechie out of Alabama. I mean, how many times have we seen him in big games, right? The college football playoff, national title game. Mechie's having just a huge role. And when I watch Mechie, I get flashes of like, because I like comping players, and there's no one-to-one comps that are perfect, right? But I like to kind of think, okay, who does this player remind me of? And with Mechie, I'm seeing some Tyler Lockett, right? He's good at going deep. You can use him on crossing routes in the intermediate part of the field. So I like Mechie. He's gotten a lot of reps at Alabama over the years, caught a lot of balls in a pro-style offense. So he checked in at 14 on my top 20. And I know he's got the ACL. That, correct me if I'm wrong, but it happened at the
Yeah.
end of the year. So I don't think he's going to
Yep.
be ready for training camp. That might, drop his draft value down maybe a round or so. But I like me some John Mechie.
And I agree. I mean, obviously, we don't know how his explosiveness will be following that ACL tear, but really, John Mechie is like the ideal receiver in this class. And what I mean by that is he's a route runner. That's kind of his main kind of ability, and that's what a lot of receivers in this class do. So yeah, 14, you see that route runner type of guy in this class, and that's what John Mechie is. He doesn't necessarily possess elite speed or separation, but I think that his ability, if you scheme it properly, once he's coming off the break on those routes, I think that that's something that John Mechie, where he could flourish in a slot role. And obviously in the slot, with the amount of route tree or the route tree in the NFL that you could have in the slot, definitely could be great. And like John Mechie works very well. From what I saw on tape, John Mechie works very well in the short game, in my opinion. You see a lot of these hitch routes, you see a lot of these kind of in routes, and you see like just a different combination of routes that Alabama ran for Mechie from different locations on the field. And I thought that Mechie worked well in the short game. It might be more instinctive in my opinion, where Mechie's just looking at the quarterback, trying to see where can he be to put the quarterback in a good place to make a play. And I think that that's kind of a part of the game that Mechie kind of does well in. And so while Mechie might not necessarily like be the fastest receiver, or he might not necessarily be the most explosive at 5'11", 187, I think that I like that profile as a slot receiver with that solid route running ability. And there are a lot of teams that do value route running in the NFL from their receivers, because that's kind of like just what sets up the quarterback to have good success. Because not like I don't think that Mechie will go to the New York Giants, but a team like the New York Giants, what I've watched from a quarterback like Daniel Jones is the reason he didn't click with Kenny Golladay early in the season is because Daniel Jones is not a quarterback who is really that he's not a gunslinger in a way. And what I mean by that is he's somewhat afraid to throw in these deeper and tightly contested kind of areas where Kenny Golladay excels in, and that's where you're not utilizing the skills of your receiver. So if John Mechie goes to the one of these type of places, he might not necessarily be best utilized, because guess what? He's running routes, and while he might not possess that speed, he's running these routes. So he kind of needs a quarterback that can understand the feel for the game and have a rapport with him where they can connect on certain routes. And that's where I think scheme will matter for where Mechie goes. But I do like the profile, and I do think that if he responds well coming off that ACL tear, he can be productive just like any other Alabama receiver.
You know what I love what you hit on right there is the fact that some teams philosophically they want their wide receivers to separate. Some offensive minds are okay with less separation and throwing contested balls or back shoulder fades. This is something I've picked up with Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan values separation, and his play calling and play designs are designed to get separation. He doesn't call a bunch of back shoulder fades because
right, yeah.
in his mind, Shanahan wants to scheme guys open. In a back shoulder fade, you're more so relying on the wide receiver making a great play or the DB not getting his head around to find the ball. So philosophically, some coaches value separation and others say, hey, you know what? This guy wins contested balls. Let's throw it up to him.
And I mean, one thing, like speaking on that back shoulder point, even with Trey Lance, right? You thought, wait, if we have a guy who's got the ability to rocket balls in, are we going to see that back shoulder kind of thing? And I don't think we necessarily did. Like when you look at it, Shanahan ran the same offense that he had with Jimmy Garoppolo with Trey Lance at quarterback. It's the same amount of the same amount of concepts. It's just Lance was hitting different routes that Garoppolo doesn't normally hit, and Lance was also missing on some routes, like he threw behind Deebo Samuel in the Texans game the first half. That's just a play that comes to mind. But like definitely what I see is these coaches don't necessarily change up their scheme, especially a guy like Shanahan. I think that he's going to just expand on the work that he's done so far because he's been so successful with that scheme. And that's something that I do think that he's going to continue, and which is why I think a guy like John Mechie could definitely work in a scheme like San Francisco. Although I do think a lot of receivers are like that in this draft, especially because they've got a lot of polished route runners in this class for sure.
No doubt. And for the 49ers, what I'm targeting is a deep threat, kind of someone to stretch the field. I mean, Ayuk can do it, Debo can do it, but a true blazer, that's kind of what I'm eyeing for the 49ers. And it'd probably be a later round pick. I don't expect, unless Christian Watson slips to the second round, pick 61, then I'm all for it. Go ahead and grab a wide receiver in round 2. But other than that, wait till the 4th, 5th round. One of these blazers, speed demons, field stretchers is going to slip down to the 5th round, and I think that's where I'd snag a guy.
And I agree. And that brings us to a good point. Where do you think the 49ers then, if not receiver, are going to target at 61? What do you think their strategy is going to be going into the draft?
I want to say let's grab a corner, but it feels like the Niners philosophically like to wait on cornerback. And so at 61, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we went O-line, Rohan. Would not be surprised if it was O-line, whether it's, a center, Alex Mack. Is he coming back? We don't know. And Rohan, I think when I heard you talking in Spaces, it sounded like you were optimistic Alex Mack was coming back.
Yeah.
And I wasn't a speaker, so I couldn't push back on it. But for some reason, I kind of wanted to push back a little bit, only because I remember Lynch, when Staley was mulling retirement, Lynch came out and said, "Oh, we expect Staley to come back." I'm paraphrasing, but this was before the draft. And sure enough, Staley retired. 49ers went, and was that the draft we took McGlinchey? I think it might have been I think we took McGlinchey because we had the need at tackle. And either way, Lynch was kind of stretching the truth with us before about offensive line and whether he's coming back or not. So I'm not sure if Mac was going to retire, they wouldn't tell us right now anyway, because they don't want every team knowing that we have a hole at the center position. So there could be some gamesmanship going on. But either way, even if Mac plays another year, we need another interior lineman. Aaron Banks, Rohan, you draft a guard in the 2nd round, that guy needs to play, man. I'm telling you, you don't draft guards in the 2nd round and sit him a year. Like, he couldn't beat out Daniel Brunskill, which Brunskill, I mean, he's no slouch, but he's not a star, offensive guard. So I was a bit disappointed Banks couldn't beat him out and get on the field.
Yeah. When I'm looking at it, I'll address the Banks point first. When I'm looking at it, I wasn't necessarily as disappointed necessarily in Banks last year. The reason is, when we go into training camp, obviously as a rookie in this complex offense, I feel like you probably need the entirety of the offseason to grasp the offense and kind of challenge the starter for the position, especially when it's a guy like Daniel Brunskill, who's been in this situation for a while, and he also understands a good amount of positions. I think Brunskill best serves as that swing tackle like he did in 2020 when he played a combination of left tackle, right tackle, and also slid inside at center. But when you look at it, Banks had an injury going into training camp, sidelined him about 2-3 weeks, and at that point I felt, it's probably going to be a little too late. Was it what the 49ers wanted? Probably not. It probably wanted him to slide in right guard, maybe slide over to left guard if Tomlinson grew to be too expensive. And so it's probably not the plan that the 49ers had, slotting Brunskill in at right guard, but that's what happened, and I understand it because Banks didn't have a full offseason as a rookie to grasp this offense, and I do think that it probably would have gotten more complicated had they even switched to Trey Lance, which would have made the situation even harder because you now move to an entirely different quarterback who has different tendencies, which we saw the offensive line struggle in week 5 when Lance first stepped on the field. But you're right. Going into the season, I do think that Banks deserves to play just because you drafted him with the 48th overall pick. You need to start getting value on these draft picks. And I thought going into this draft, Banks, Mitchell, and Deommodore Lenoir, those 3 players I thought, alongside Ambry Thomas as well, I thought those 4 players were picks for 2022. And the reason being, we had solid stopgap options, and Banks fit more of the power scheme that the 49ers are expected to run in 2022 under Trey Lance at quarterback rather than the agile scheme because he didn't have as quick feet as the 49ers would have preferred at that right guard position, being a guard. And so that's where I thought Banks was probably was a pick for Trey Lance, where you probably need a little more pass protection, which was what Banks kind of excelled in at college. And
Trey
so,
Sermon too. Trey
yeah.
Sermon kind of feels like he would fit more with Trey Lance in the shotgun. I mean, from a distance.
Under a power scheme. Yeah. The reason that I thought Sermon could play a little more last season was because we had Raheem Mostert, who wasn't necessarily a power running back, but he was the outside zone running back. So to have a complement that could fit in that power scheme, that could have been Sermon. But obviously, Mostert gets injured, and we see Elijah Mitchell, who kind of takes over as both of those roles, serving in somewhat of a bell cow role. And I do think we saw the benefits and the negatives of that because he broke the rookie record, averaged 4.7 yards per carry, which is phenomenal for a rookie. But he also got his fair share of injuries, which is why I think we see a more balanced attack from multiple amount of running backs next season, including guys like Mitchell, Sermon, Samuel, likely a guy who we draft alongside Trey Lance. So I think that
I want Jeff Wilson back. I mean, I think Jeff Wilson should be pennies on the dollar, and I like him as a fourth guy in the room if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, he could be a very solid option because obviously he's also been with this team for a good amount of time. He was nursing injury for a good portion of the year, but he's been effective, and especially he has experience as a third down passing back. And when you look at it, Anthony Lynn, the coach, now the assistant head coach and the running backs coach for the 49ers, what has Anthony Lynn kind of excelled at in his previous stumps? You look at the Los Angeles Chargers. You had Austin Eckler and Melvin Gordon. Both of them were pass-catching backs alongside their running back ability. And then you look at this year, guess what? DeAndre Swift starts jumping on the scene, flourishing as a pass-catching back, although he struggled somewhat as a running back where he averaged only 3.9 yards per carry. Guess what? Swift's value completely increased because he's catching 7-8 passes a game out of the backfield for Jared Goff. And I don't think that that's going to be the number that a running back in this offense catches just because Kyle Shanahan's system works a little differently, where obviously receivers are more open. But
we don't throw the ball to the backs a ton. I mean, don't get me wrong. We run screen passes and whatnot, but it's not implemented in the game plan as much as what you're alluding to, like Anthony Lynn had in his stops.
You're right.
Like Austin Eckler's catching like 6 or 7 balls a game. Same thing with DeAndre Swift. So
exactly,
I like where you're coming, and I wonder if the Niners kind of teeter a little more towards that direction of checking down to the backs a little bit more. That'll be something we'll have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, and a play that we saw a lot this offseason, or that's this season, that kind of consistently failed. It's that use check wheel route from the backfield where he gets freed up and he goes wide open and Jimmy Garoppolo misses him. It's happened a couple of times.
Or Nick Mullins too. Mullins missed him wide open too. It's like, man,
like that play.
Guys?
Exactly. In that play, Kyle Shanahan likes to favor that wheel route, and consistently that wheel route has gotten open. Mullins has run it. Sorry, not Mullins. Kittle's run it. We've seen Juszczyk run it. And then I remember one play earlier in the season, in the first quarter of a game, I'm forgetting which game, Michael Hasty ran it. And Garoppolo threw a fairly solid ball. Hasty just couldn't come up with it because he doesn't have the hands. And so that's where I think a guy like Trey Sermon, if Anthony Lynn can develop him, or a guy like Jeff Wilson, or a guy that we draft could potentially slot in at that third down running back role and kind of open up Kyle Shanahan's offense where he could call these kind of wheel routes more often for running backs and not only use them as options, but use them as decoys, which frees up the rest of the offense, which I think Kyle Shanahan has excelled at doing because he's used George Kittle as a decoy on multiple occasions. That's why George Kittle's production might not seem as good as it may be. And he's used also Deebo Samuel as a decoy. When Deebo Samuel is flourishing, guess what? 2 guys are going to go shadow Deebo. You run him on a route, you get another guy open. And that's kind of how Kyle Shanahan works. He balances out these receivers by using each other as decoys to free up other receivers because he believes all 3 are talented enough to make plays on the ball. And using having another option at running back only solidifies that stance because now you're going to have another threat out of the backfield, which you normally didn't have in this offense prior.
I agree with you. And the one thing, Rohan, let me tell you, I'm not a JaMychal Hasty guy. I'm not a big Hasty fan. I think we need to upgrade the pass catching role at the running back position.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. Which is why, I mean, in the running backs that have scouted so far, I had a list of 5 running backs that I wrote an article about, and
Mhm.
a good amount of those running backs were somewhat of a pass catching type of back. My number one guy on that list was James Cook out of Georgia, and I know a lot of people are intrigued about him because obviously the brother of Dalvin Cook, he obviously ran 4.42. But I do think that he's a little undersized at running back, being 5'11", 190. So he might not be a bell cow back, but that's not what Kyle Shanahan wants in his offense. So not being a bell cow back, that might slide him a couple picks in this draft, which could be beneficial for a team like the 49ers looking to select running back. And Cook has also possessed that receiving ability. I know he caught 27 catches for 284 yards and 4 touchdowns in 2021. So he's definitely got experience as a pass catching back in that Georgia offense that normally prefers running backs to run the football, which is interesting. And that's why I thought James Cook could be a very solid fit for this team. And it's not like he's the only guy. Like there are other guys as well. Cook obviously is the one that kind of like pops out to people. Another guy, an under the radar guy, is Missouri running back Tyler Beatty, who was actually a very, very consistent receiver this past season. He got 54 catches, I believe, as a Missouri. I don't know their logo, but at Missouri this past season, while also running as a bell cow back for that team. And I think that having these guys with versatility as pass catching backs only just strengthens your offense because it makes another position not one-dimensional, but two-dimensional, both in the running game and the passing game, which makes them effective as third down options.
Yeah, I'm a big Cook guy. You're right. He does seem like he'd be able to fill like a third down pass catching role, but also, he might not be a workhorse where you want to give him 20 carries because he's got that smaller frame, but he's got that one cut. He's a one cut
You're
runner
right.
that fits the Shanahan scheme.
Ooh.
You can run him on the stretch, and
And
he'll
it's
as
just
soon as he sees
beautiful
the
to
hole,
watch.
boom. Yes.
Just beautiful to watch because
some
there
of
are a
these
lot of
running
these
backs
guys
kind of
as well.
tiptoe, don't want to burst and hit the hole, but Cook, he sees it, boom, he's off.
And the thing about Cook, right? When we look at Elijah Mitchell, I know a lot of people love to praise Elijah Mitchell. But for me, Elijah Mitchell struggles at times to find that hole. He struggles at times with that one cut ability because he doesn't possess the elite vision that a guy like Raheem Mostert does. And maybe as 49ers fans, we're spoiled because we watched Mostert excel in that role for so long, averaging 5.7 yards per carry throughout the entirety of his 49ers career, despite everyone knowing he was going to run the football when he was on that field. And so, like when we
I
see
miss
Mostert
Raheem. I
excel,
miss him,
yeah,
Rohan. I miss him. How many times have we seen it? It might be a stretch right, and Raheem sees the cutback lane, and he
yeah,
just cuts it
misdirection,
against the grain,
exactly.
and he's gone. And it's like, man, that's why I want Raheem back, and I think he's going to be cheap.
I don't disagree at all. I don't
Yeah,
disagree at all. And
I
I
love
mean,
Raheem.
there might be a betting war for him, which is why he might be gone. But I mean, if he's brought back, man, I'd love that, because Raheem Mostert is something different in this offense. And James Cook, you're right, he possesses that vision. And that's something that's very, very vital in this 49ers offense because you're not necessarily running using your athletic ability, you're running using your instincts. And when you got a guy like James Cook who's got the athletic profile and the instincts, that's something that could flourish well in a smaller volume role in this offense. And he could be another guy who's averaging around 4.5 to 5 yards a carry if he's placed in this offense.
I agree.
Yeah, but back to your receiver list. Let's get to that top 10. And I want to know, who are you
Yeah.
interested in that top 10? Because
Yeah.
this is, like, I know a lot of people saying this isn't the strongest class, but I think that this is a very, very consistent, solid class. And that top 10 receivers is going to show why. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I gotta let you know in on my my guy at number 12. The player I got is Alec Pierce out of Cincinnati,
Yeah.
Desmond Ritter's top target. He's not in the top 10 for me, but he's right on the cusp. He could have been. There's a couple guys who I thought about bumping him up for, but I got him at 12. And what I love about Alec Pierce is he wins all over the field. Cincinnati used him as a deep threat, and he just kept winning deep down the field. He was catching contested balls. But what I really like, Rohan, and why I think he fits the 49ers is his physicality after the catch. He's 6'3", he's got a strong frame, and he plays hard, like a Debo, like a Kittle. He's fighting for yards, he's physical, and that's why I think Alec Pierce could be a deep threat that also brings that physicality that would fit the mold of a Kyle Shanahan wide receiver.
You're right. And I mean, after that combine, some people might say, wait, so how do you not have Alex Pierce at 10 or in the top 10? Because you know what? He ran a 4.41, had a very, very solid broad jump, very high vertical jump at 40.5 inches. But I agree. I mean, the route running necessarily isn't there on tape when you watch it at times. So that's like the one knack against Pierce. And the route running, because it's not always there, it kind of limits the speed at a point because you need to be able to run routes at the speed that you're running at game speed, which is why the 4.41 might be a little misleading. But the traits with Pierce, certainly you can see what he has because you're right. He is a physical receiver. He has that 50-50 ball ability, and that's what the 49ers want, a red zone target. And I think that he could definitely be a red zone target for a team like this at 6'3", 211. But more importantly, what do the 49ers value out of their receivers? You see a guy like Juwan Jennings, what does he do the best? Run block. And I think that Pierce, although he might not be as polished of a run blocker right now, that size and that speed alongside this receiving coach, this like coaching staff and the physicality that they impose on their receivers, you've seen guys like Brandon Ayuk, who are smaller receivers, develop into strong run blockers. And I think Alec Pierce, if he's in the system, could develop into a very strong run blocker, showcasing a two-way ability.
No doubt. And I like Juwan Jennings, but Rohan, I'm looking to upgrade that big slot. Like, I think Juwan Jennings would be like a phenomenal, like, wide receiver 4, where I'm looking to upgrade the big slot. And one of the thoughts I've had, Rohan, let me know if I'm crazy, is Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram could be like a tight end too, and I feel like you could put him out in the big slot. I know his hands are kind of iffy, he drops too many balls, but man, he's another guy who's just got that size, that speed, former first-round pick, might come a little bit cheaper than expected. I know I asked you on Twitter, I said, Rohan, how much are you expecting Evan Ingram to get paid? Because I'm looking at it from a 49ers perspective. We know we flirted with Austin Hooper in the past. We might want to go with some more dual tight end sets. And Evan Ingram's a guy who could fulfill the dual tight end and play some big slot.
And I mean, you're not wrong. Evan Ingram definitely has the athletic profile to do that, and we've seen that. I thought that I forget what I told you. I think it was around the 6 to 7 million range is what I'd expect after that Njoku tag, which came at 10 million, and the offer, which likely goes around 13 million. I think that the price for tight ends might be a little higher. And the reason that I thought Ingram might fetch 6 to 7 is because he's one of the younger tight ends on the market. And like you said, he's got the athletic profile, which is what intrigues teams sometimes the most, especially with these projects.
So what intrigues me, Rohan?
Yeah. But Ingram would be a solid player. Do I think he's necessarily the best fit with the 49ers at that tight end slot? Not necessarily, just because he doesn't possess the run blocking ability that 49ers might want. And he also possesses, like you said, he doesn't always have the best hands. He has sometimes spotty hands. And the one thing the 49ers have kind of struggled at, especially last season at that receiver position, is the hands issue. So that's one thing, because Garoppolo, like at least it was earlier on the season, you saw Garoppolo had receivers drop the ball on a consistent basis, which is why that was a bit of a struggle despite some of the on target throws. But if the 49ers do believe that they could develop a guy like Ingram into a stronger run blocker than he currently is, that athletic profile has got to be intriguing and tantalizing, especially at his age. He's only 27 years old. You could develop a guy if you sign him to a 2-year deal. Guess what? You've got a nice tight end for the next 2 years. And if it doesn't work out, I think the 49ers definitely could target tight end in the draft with the later round. Target a guy like Chigakonkwo or maybe even a Jelani Woods, who are also similar players in that I think Jelani Woods has the potential to be the next Kyle Juszczyk because he's got that strong build. He's also a pretty fast runner, and he's got a strong he's got the potential to be a blocker. So having the ability to develop a player while also having two solidified options, which Kyle Shanahan has definitely looked for. He's got Jordan Reed in the past. He's drafted 2 players in Ross Dwelley and Charlie Warner, and the projects just haven't worked out so far. Charlie Warner took steps last year, but you're right. The thing is, people want to upgrade. They want to have consistent and productiveness at that position. And with the 49ers, who value that tight end position not only in the blocking part, but also as in the passing game, I think a guy like Evan Ingram could be valuable.
Yeah. And let's go back to the wide receiver list because, Rohan, I got a receiver that I'm higher on. I want to know what you think about it. a receiver I'm higher on than anybody I've seen, and it's Romeo Doubs out of Nevada. He's 6'2", and he's got this tantalizing size, speed, acceleration combo. I mean, when you're watching 40 some odd receivers, some of these guys pop off on the tape more than others. And Romeo Doubs' tape just jumped out at me. But Rohan, the more I kind of dug on Romeo Doubs, and I absolutely love him, I got him ranked 8 inside my top 10. But I was listening to an interview with Dobbs, and he doesn't seem the most sociable, well-spoken. So I'm trying to add that into consideration. Like, does that matter if someone doesn't interview well, or maybe, for lack of a better term, maybe he's not the sharpest tool? Where does that matter to you in the scale of draft prospects?
I think it's very team dependent because you see teams who are high on energy. And I know he got fired, but a coach like Joe Judge seemed like he was high on energy and high on like discipline and motor when he was looking at players. And maybe that's a reason he got fired. But looking at it, yeah, there are teams who probably prioritize that type of character, and then teams that also are like they like the humor, they like the kind of the fun aspect of teams. And I think the 49ers fit on that side because you guys like Deebo Samuel, Arden Key. I mean, you saw the pregame celebration every time they had it, the boombox, going out. So they're definitely, I think they seem like one of the more fun teams in a way in the NFL. But looking at it, I don't know necessarily how much it plays into a role because if the production's there, I think that like some players just don't interview well. I think that some players just succumb sometimes under the microphone, but really in reality, what matters is the play. As long as the character doesn't really like pop off the charts in a negative way, like we've seen some players have with off the field issues or just like a demeanor that doesn't necessarily strike as like it could be bold, but in a bad way. I think that that's potentially where you view interviews and characters and negative
Those
aspect.
are the red flags. I got you. Yeah, Dobbs. I absolutely love Romeo Dobbs. I think he's going to be a phenomenal deep threat. I saw him catching bubble screens, and then he makes one guy miss. Boom, he's off. I mean, the defensive, or excuse me, the coaches on Nevada were calling him the cheetah in terms of Dobbs. And what I was very disappointed with, Rohan, is he didn't do anything at the combine. Here I am. I've been hyping up Romeo Dobbs. I was telling Jordan Elliott, I was like, hey, man, check out Dobbs. Let me know how he's looking. And then he's like, dude, he didn't do his interview today. Now he's not running the 40. He's not on the field catching balls from these quarterbacks. I'm like, Dobbs, I'm hyping you up, but you got to help me out. Show me something.
I know what you mean, because the one thing that probably hurts Dobbs, like in this draft kind of process is, look, you had so many receivers that tested extremely well at the combine, and you had guys that fell because they didn't necessarily test as well, or they didn't necessarily like test as amazingly. And a guy like that immediately comes to mind is David Bell, the Purdue receiver who ran in the 4.6s when I expected him to kind of run in the 4.5s and in the maybe in the late 4.5s, but he ran in the 4.6s.
He measured shorter than I expected too. I thought David Bell was 6'2", 6'3", came in at 6'1", had a lackluster vert. Yeah, he was a guy who, we talked about Alec Pierce earlier. Alec Pierce and David Bell essentially swapped positions on my board because Pierce had this excellent combine. David Bell's was lackluster, so it was kind of an easy swap to make.
And you're right. I mean, like combines necessarily aren't reflective of what's shown on tape. But one thing that I've learned over this draft prospect is I see how players test, and then I'll put it back to the film and see is how they play reflective of how they tested. And if it's not, then I don't worry about it too much. But if it is, then it's either a good thing or potentially a bad thing. And a guy like Romeo Doubs right now, we don't know how he tested. And with so many other players testing really well, that might diminish his stock until his pro day where he could come on the scene. But the thing is, there are certain receivers in people's minds right now after that combine. And people, yeah, like you said, Dobbs probably, I don't know necessarily, but I don't think that Dobbs interviewed at the combine, which was a big thing because a lot of teams get to see how these players react and how these players are not necessarily under pressure, but just how they fit in their team. And if you don't go through that process, it doesn't necessarily help you. It might not hurt you, but it might not necessarily help you while other
I think
receivers
it
are
does
helping
hurt,
themselves.
Rohan. I think it does hurt him. You don't interview at 32 teams. All the teams are at this convention, right? They're all in Indianapolis, and you choose not to interview. I mean, that could be a bit of a red flag, and I wouldn't be surprised if teams drop him down their big board. I'm still high on him because just from what I saw on tape, I love Romeo Dobbs, but it'd be hard to see if I go to this, if I'm at the combine and you're saying you're not going to interview, like what? All you're going to do is get measured. Like that's all he did.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something interesting to watch. And Dobbs is definitely, I won't say that I have him as high as you have him currently. I think you're the one guy that I've seen, but I won't knack on him because Dobbs, you're right. He possesses the speed, and especially when he's in space, I think that speed kind of shows. You take short routes or you take like these bubble screens, or you even take these like plays that set you up to run after the catch. And I think that's where Dobbs excels the most. Do I think his route running is as polished? No. But
No.
one thing that I've seen, like it might be a little bit less diminished in this class, but one thing I've seen with route runners before, right? You've seen guys like DK Metcalf with limited route trees in college, and you've seen them excel. It's just because they weren't produced or they weren't given a more extensive route tree in college. Doesn't mean that they won't be given an extensive route tree and excel in that role at the next level. And I do think that Dobbs' speed, while he is a speed guy, I do think when he really runs routes, I do think that speed diminishes a bit. He might not be as athletic, in my opinion, when he's going through those routes as he may seem in a straight line when he's running after that catch. But I don't think that's a knack on Dobbs because he is a big frame receiver. He's 6'2", 200. So he's definitely got the strength. And I think one thing that works in Dobbs' favor is he's got the ability to make contested catches, which not a lot of receivers have in this class. Because when you think of route running, you don't necessarily think of the big bodied guys, but you think of the smaller receivers. There are a lot of receivers weighing in at that 181 to 190 kind of range right now. Dobbs is a little stronger than that, and that provides him with an extra element in this class, which some teams may like, and other teams, while they may not like it as much, it definitely shows some intrigue.
And you mentioned contested catches, and that leads me to my next guy. I'm curious where you have Drake London ranked on your board, because I know I'm lower on him than the consensus. I got him at 7.
Okay.
And I mean, at 7, I think he's going to be a good player, but some people got him as their top guy, 1 or 2. What I see from London, he's big, right? We all know he's got a great build. He's got a good size, but the separation, it was like, was he separating consistently? USC was throwing him so many jump balls, back shoulder fades. It was contested. And man, I like my receivers to separate. I mean, Rohan, London to me looked like he was like 15 pounds away from being a tight end.
That's an interesting one because London has the athletic profile, right? We've seen London play basketball. Like he was I believe a 3-star athlete, and he's obviously now coming off a major injury, which probably drops him. I haven't fixated my top 10, so I don't know exactly where London ranks, but I am not one of those guys who has him currently at the 1-2 range. I think it's going to be closer to that 6-7-ish range rather than the 1-2 range after I finalize. Although it could be lower. I haven't done an entire tape study on London yet, but what I'm seeing from London is, you're right, he is a contested catch guy. Although one thing that I heard from other people, I haven't necessarily seen enough of myself to make the final conclusion, is that London catches balls with his chest rather compared to his arms, rather uses that big-bodied frame, and that's kind of a concern sometimes in the NFL level because it provides cornerbacks and defensive backs with the ability to potentially knock that ball out or potentially recover with that extra second that they have if you catch it with your body rather than with your hands. And so that's one thing that I've heard about London, which I'm going to see if that's true on tape consistently or not. But you're right. London isn't necessarily the fastest receiver either. He's big-bodied, 6'4", around 220, and he also So like the part about London that kind of raises concerns for me is you don't have that quickness, and I don't think he's extremely explosive off the first step. And so when you have that receiver in London where he's not necessarily as explosive off his first step, but also doesn't really have the best technique for that contested catch. I don't know exactly where that like it's very developable. And if you develop that talent, you're definitely going to have a great receiver because he's big bodied and you might have your next Mike Williams. But definitely I think
Mike
he
Williams.
requires some more
I could
development.
see. I like them. The Mike Williams comp right there on Twitter just today. I had seen someone for Drake London throw out a Megatron comp, and I'm like, are we watching the same tape? Like, I don't know. I was not getting Megatron vibes from Drake London.
Yeah, I don't think it's Megatron necessarily. I thought Megatron was a freak athlete alongside his like he was a big frame guy as a freak athlete with great contested catch skills. And I thought that it's a little bit of a stretch to name him to one of the greatest receivers of all time like that. But Mike Williams, I think, is a fairly solid ceiling, I think, for Drake London. Because Mike Williams again is one of those contested catch guys, and we saw him flourish on the scene last season. But Mike Williams also has a great ability to pinpoint catches and make these catches. Mike Williams, I thought, was also he's a little bit of a runner, of course, being an NFL receiver. But Drake London, if he can develop that route running a little more to make up for his lack of like explosiveness in a way and lack of speed in a way, I do think that it's not necessarily lack of, but compared to other players in this class,
He's so big. I mean, you're 6'5", right? You're not going to move the same as a guy that's 5'10". But for being 6'5", he moves really well, and he's got really good feet.
Right.
Mike Williams, Mike Evans. Mike Evans is another 6'5" receiver who's got really good feet. When you see him just in the red zone, the way he can set up a DB with his footwork and his head fake.
That's one thing. 100%. Like the red zone ability, I think, is where he's going to receive the most intrigue because there are receivers right now that just excel in the red zone. And because they excel in the red zone, teams find them extremely valuable. You have those players where they consistently get touchdowns year in after year in after year in, and they might not be the best receivers in the NFL necessarily, but they
look at Marvin Jones.
That.
Marvin Jones has like double-digit touchdowns, or he's got a 4-touchdown game. Yeah, guys, the bigger-bodied guys who could really get up high and snag the football.
Yeah, but one thing positive-wise for London in terms of tracking that deep ball and being able to catch them, I do think that his instincts when he's going up for that contested catch is very well. He's very aware of where he is on the field. He's very aware of his defenders, and he's able to to haul that ball in, like despite that receiver or defender being in his space because of that instinctual awareness around him.
No doubt. Hey, Rohan, the last guy I want to touch on my list is another Alabama wide receiver. We already talked about Mechie, but I'm talking about the absolute speed demon that is Jameson Williams. I love Jameson Williams. I was trying to figure out, is he 1? Is he 2? Is he 1? Is he 2? Right? I ended up settling with Garrett Wilson at 1, and I got Jameson Williams 2. But I absolutely love Jameson Williams, and maybe I may or may not have a thing for speed, Rohan. But Jameson Williams, I mean, the guy just looks like the best athlete on the field when he gets the ball. I mean, nobody's catching him from behind. And he's got he's a sudden route runner. I wouldn't call him like the shiftiest, like he's not breaking down, but when he makes his cut, it's sharp and it's hard. And with that speed, I mean, it's hard to keep up with him.
Exactly. I think the route you hammered it well because he's got that electric speed. But on top of that, he's a fairly solid route runner. And I do think that, especially against schemes like cover 2 that are prominent in the NFL, where you're going against a good amount of man coverage, I do think that definitely benefits a guy like Jameson Williams, where while you might not be the biggest build receiver, if you're in a man scheme, once you get past that press, that first step, I do think that Williams' route running ability and his speed kind of just separate him from receivers. I do think that sometimes, though, he did have issues getting off that press at times. I was watching cornerback tape, and that's where I noticed it a bit more. But Williams, if he's able to flourish in space, I do think that Williams has the ability definitely to be a very top-notch receiver in this league. You see guys from Alabama that have done similarly before. He is a little bit of a smaller size guy, right? He's 6'1", about 180. But Jalen Waddle was like that as well, and Jalen Waddle had a very solid season with the Miami Dolphins this past season. And Jameson Williams, I think will flourish in a role that hinges on versatility, because I think that Jameson Williams should not just be relegated to the outside. I think he should be moved around. I think he should be moved inside to the slot, utilize his entire skill set, and be able to put him in different positions to make plays with the ball in his hands. So that's something that I do agree could definitely benefit Jameson Williams. I do think obviously there's ACL concerns, which might drop him to the later part of that first round. But man, if the Chiefs get him at 28, Twitter is going to be livid. People are going to be livid. I'm telling you that.
Don't even bring it up, Rohan.
Yeah, it's going to be hard, but I do think that he definitely. I think he'll test well whenever he tests. I think if he tests at the pro day, he'll test well because he's got the ability to separate. He's got that explosiveness, and he's got very solid speed at the receiver position, despite having his smaller frame.
Hey, man, Jameson Williams on the field, you better keep that safety over the top. And I know, yeah, you're right. I saw that too, the press coverage. But if he beats the press and there's no one over the top, let me tell you, it's over. And it's the same thing with Dobbs too. Dobbs is another guy I didn't mention who needs to improve on his releases off the line, because he's another guy who doesn't do well. Some of the Senior Bowl videos that I saw was kind of like Dobbs was having trouble get off that press. But I think that's something you can teach. And if he does beat you off the line like Dobbs, I mean, Jameson Williams is another level, but both of these guys, if they beat you off the line, it's over.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I think Williams' ability with that athletic profile to adjust and make very, very hard catches reminds me, I won't say it like I won't fully compare him, but it reminds me a bit of CeeDee Lamb with that just the catchability. I think CeeDee Lamb, we saw at the combine 2 years ago, made an amount just an array of amazing catches.
I remember that. Yeah, the one-handed grabs.
Exactly. And I think that Jameson Williams, although he's a smaller receiver, I do think he's got a similar ability to make a good ton of plays in different angles, make those difficult catches. And I think that he definitely could benefit. Do I think there could be injury concern later on because of the amount of burden that he probably puts on his body with those type of catches? Potentially. But I do think that you still take the immense upside that there is with his talent in terms of speed, ability to separate, run pristine routes, especially those deep vertical routes, deep out routes, post, corner, all sorts of different type of routes, while also being able to work after the catch and make very tough catches. So pretty solid receiver. Probably on my, without confirmation yet, probably definitely goes top 5 in my list. Floor probably 6, but yeah, he's a top 5 receiver, I think, in my list for sure.
No doubt.
But hey, man, love talking receivers with you. And I know we're probably going to catch a space with each other sometime soon. But everyone else, thank you guys so much for watching. We broke down the Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson news, talked about some Jimmy Garoppolo 49ers implications, and we got to the most important part, receivers in this NFL draft. For anybody that wants any information, go follow Bay Area Baller on Twitter. Eric Price, one of the better receiver evaluators I've seen so far. He's done a lot of work, and make sure you watch his top 20 receiver video if you want an extensive look at the 2022 receivers. I'll drop those links down in the description. But thank you guys so much for watching. 49ers Red Zone episode is coming out this Friday. We're going to be live again, and we'll catch you next time. Peace, y'all.